Corruption in Togo is unpunished, and it is the people who expose the corruption that are punished.
Even as a child in Togo, there is no escaping the dictatorship.
I couldn't believe that level of abuse and torture could exist in any country. Corruption is enabled by lack of transparency. Right. And it is the opacity of transactions that enables the corruption to exist. Bitcoin as being a very powerful tool that can really help us one day reduce the level of corruption in our governments. Bitcoin is the fastest growing technology on the continent, and Africa has the fastest adoption rate than any other region in the world.
I'm Casey Michelle.
And I'm Elisha Maldonado.
And this is Dissidents and Dictators.
The Financial Freedom Report is a weekly newsletter from the Human Rights Foundation. It covers the risks and weaknesses of today's financial systems, especially in authoritarian regimes. Each edition focuses on how banks and governments undermine civil liberties through financial surveillance, censorship, assets confiscation, and currency instability. The report highlights tools and technologies like privacy software and updates on Bitcoin that help people gain financial independence. HRF has published more than 50 editions, sharing global stories of how people are using Bitcoin to resist oppressive systems. Subscribe at financialfreedomreport.org.
Good morning, Elisha. How are you today?
Good morning, Case. I'm all right. How about you?
I am doing just fine. I'm very happy to be back in our beautiful New York studio with you.
Reunited, and it feels so good.
Yeah, it feels very good. It feels a little sleepy. I might go get another cup of coffee because I want to be on point for our conversation with Farida Nabourema today, because we have a lot to discuss, not only about the fight for political freedom, but also the fight for financial freedom.
Yes, it's such an interesting conversation. I'm getting so much more into it the more time I spend digging into Bitcoin and this sort of, as we like to call it here, freedom money in a way, in that it helps these activists skirt some authoritarian regimes by, not having to be under their thumb and financially. And I just think that's such an interesting conversation to have. So I'm glad that she's here to get into it with us, especially in Togo and in Africa. And she talks about how the continent is really becoming to accept Bitcoin more and faster than anticipated. So
absolutely. Look, it's a wonderful introduction, not only to the usage and utility of something like Bitcoin, but of course to the regime in Togo and the country of Togo itself. We were talking about this off mic, but of course, me being me, I was Googling birds of Togo, and it's absolutely rising the ranks of places I'm going to go bird watching someday.
One of these days.
Not just yet. But anyways,
I'd like to go as well.
This is a great conversation with Farida. Folks, stay tuned, and we hope you enjoy. Well, Farida, thank you so much for joining us today. I think, if memory serves correctly, you're our first Togolese guest.
Yeah.
So what an honor. Tell us something interesting about growing up in Togo. What was it like for you? What do you think is the most unique thing about growing up in Togo for folks who haven't had the honor of visiting yet?
I will say that I grew up in a Togo that felt like the whole, I grew up in the capital city, but we had a saying growing up that you have to be careful when dating in Togo, otherwise you'll end up dating your cousin because everybody know everybody. Literally, it was impossible to meet a Togolese that doesn't know, that you don't know another person in common with. We all know each other. The towns were very small. We grew up in a community where your neighbors take care of you and your parents take care of your neighbors' kids. There was no such thing as your house is just your house. The sense of nuclear family was not limited to mom, dad, and the kids. It was the neighboring kids. When our parents buy stuff for us, even on holidays like Christmas, my mom would buy the same clothes for myself and for our neighbors' kids, and same for my siblings, and the neighbors' parents will also do the same. So we literally grew up being raised in a community. And one of the most vivid memories that I had was when we were taking national exams. The entire community is routing for you, and people bring you food, they bring you gifts before the exam day. And when you go to the exam and you come back home, everybody on the way, because we walk to school, it's about 20-30 minutes walk. Everybody on the roadside will be asking you, how did it go? Did you do well? Do you have hope? So the good thing is that when you pass, everybody knows and everybody's happy for you. And then when you fail, you also have to face everyone. But it was a very close, the culture was very closed, and it was a very warm environment growing up in, and I kind of miss that sometimes.
So when did you leave Togo? But also, if you can talk about when you started to realize this beautiful country that you were raised in is, living under an authoritarian regime.
I will say very early. Very early, without necessarily understanding what the word authoritarianism is or even dictatorship in. But I knew very early that we were in a country, at that age, you might assume that's how all countries are ruled. But very early, I can recall the fear because there was one specific event. My dad used to sit every day in front of a tree, under a tree in front of our house. And when he's sitting there, my brother and I will just be hanging around him. Then one day we were next to him, and a soldier truck, a military truck, they used to patrol the neighborhood every day. Military trucks, you'll see them with having this very heavy machinery gun on the truck with a lot of bullets underneath, and soldiers standing in it. And the truck was patrolling, and when the truck passed, my brother just froze. Like, he just froze. He couldn't even move. My dad was talking to him, and he was completely unresponsive. And my dad got upset after they left. And then I remember my dad saying something around, "Look at how these people are terrorizing my kids." But from that moment, I had a sense that seeing soldiers was never something positive. There was this constant fear of soldiers passing by around. And eventually there were several things that we did that we were used to doing as kids growing up, like coming home and learning songs, hailing the dictator, without even understanding the ramifications of the song.
Right.
Like the song saying that, "Oh, you are God given to us, you are our father, Togo is lucky to have you, we are lucky to have you as a president, you are the strongest man in Africa," all those kind of things. And I remember one day I was singing one of those songs, and my dad just got upset, and he scolded me and asked me to never sing that song in this house again. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I just couldn't understand why, because for me it was a song, and we were taught that song in school, and we were just singing it. But it took me years to realize that we were under a system of conditioning since we were children to adore the president and to see him in a certain way. In primary school, I attended a private school, so it wasn't so heavy in the private schools. But in middle schools, I was transferred to a public school, and in the public school, it was different. It was mandatory. When the president is traveling or is returning from a trip, the principal will come and inform us that we are going to the airport to go say goodbye to the president. And all the public schools in the capital city will be emptied. We'll walk from the school all the way to the airport, and we'll line up all the way on the road for like we'll make a long human queue for more than 2 kilometers to just wave goodbye at the president. Back in the days, we the kids were very excited because it meant no class all day. The moment they say we are going to welcome the president at the airport, we're like, yay, like there's no class today, and we are gone. But it took years for me to realize it was not okay for us to be missing days of school just for that. Another part of it was that on Wednesday afternoons, we will be selected to go do rehearsals, to memorize songs for the president and choreographies to dance for him. And on Sundays, we had to go to the party headquarters to sing his names and to dance for him. And it was a big event because he even had public buses that would pick students from northern cities. Like some cities are as far as 400 miles from the capital city. And they'll spend 8 hours on the road just to come and dance for him and go back. Wow. It was something that he adored. So every Sunday, the national television was dedicated to him, of citizens coming and dancing for him and singing for him. And it was a national project. As a matter of fact, they had the different groups. They call them animation groups. And those animation groups were in charge of designing the national animation for the president. And the animation is singing and praising the head of state. So those groups were sent to North Korea to learn about those choreography and stuff. And some were also sent to Congo to also learn music and dance. And they had, it was mandatory for public school students, university students, and all civil servants. Each civil servant unit has their own choreography and their songs and uniforms, and we wear uniforms with the picture of the president on it. That were given to every group. And if you underperform, then the head of your department is going to be punished, either be removed or assigned to a village as a punishment. Or the principal of your school is going to be punished if your performance is below what he wanted. Mm-hmm. So it was a national program of entertainment for the president, which was in place for more than 30 years.
I was going to say, Farida, this, of course, sounds very similar to other similar programs elsewhere in places like North Korea or in places like Turkmenistan or China or Equatorial Guinea or even a place like Venezuela or Cuba. Even as a child in Togo, there is no escaping the dictatorship. And, of course, you're growing up in this, but it sounds like your father also instilled in you this sense that this is not normal. This is not something you should just accept. And of course, you then rose to prominence after elementary school, after middle school. I believe you were 20 years old when you started the Fo Must Go campaign, of course, about the president, his first name, Fo. I guess my question is, what role did your father play in instilling this kind of viewpoint where you just don't have to accept something like this? And then beyond that, where did you actually find the sources for courage and for confidence to start the Fo Must Go campaign, given again that this dictatorship is all-consuming for those that are in Togo?
Entirely from my dad. My dad's story were intertwined with mine. I'll give you a very simple story. When I was in my senior year in middle school, I was 13 years old or 14 years old. The EU had announced that they were rekindling their aid program to Togo, which was suspended 10 years prior to that due to human rights violations in 1993. And the president wanted to organize a massive celebration to inform the world that the people of Togo are really happy that the EU was resuming aid to Togo. So all public schools were asked to be emptied to go to the party headquarters to celebrate the president's victory. So I came home and I told my dad that our principal asked for us to be at school at 5 o'clock in the morning because we will be leaving the school at 5 and walk to the party headquarters to ensure we get there by 6:30 because the president has to be there by 7. And my dad said, no problem, tomorrow morning we'll go. And the next morning, I got in my school uniform and I got out and I was walking to school, and there were many other kids walking because it was the community school to the school, and friends were like, oh, Freya, your dad is coming with you today. I said, yes. And we just got there. And as soon as we arrived at the school and the principal saw my dad, he said, oh, Mr. Nabourema, your daughter is not one of them. She doesn't have to come. And my dad said, oh, I just wanted to make sure. Okay, bye-bye. Let's go. And on our way back to the house, my dad kept cursing. My dad said, they are so lucky they didn't let me come there. I'll have shown them what I was doing today. But the principal knew my dad was an activist, and him coming was going to be troublemaking. But I understood literally that was not working. It's not going to work. By then, I already had a political consciousness because my political consciousness arose in my junior year in middle school when my dad was arrested, and the soldiers came to our house to patrol the house because he was attending a party meeting, and at the time, opposition party meetings were banned, and he spent time in prison. And when he came out, that's when I got so close to him and wanted to know what led to his arrest, what happened, and the details of his arrest, his detention, and his recounting of and then that's when he explained to me that he has actually been to prison more than, I think that was the 17th time he was going to jail.
Oh, wow.
And he, at that point, he didn't really care anymore. And then he started telling me the stories about the times he spent in jail in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, and this was 2003. So giving me, the more he told me about it, the more angry I was about it. I will say that it wasn't until just a few years ago that I realized that those stories left a level of trauma in me, but my response was anger. I was so angry that I wanted those things to end. I couldn't believe that level of abuse and torture could exist in any country. And I just wanted it to end. And 2 years after that, when Eyadema died, we all were convinced it would be the true liberation of Togo. And soon after that, his son took over. And it was a mass massacre of more than 1,000 Togolese people for him to force himself in power. And it was then, in 2005, I was 15 years old, that I coined the term "4 must go." And I told myself that I don't care what it's going to cost me, but I'm not going to rest until I see this guy leave power, because his father couldn't have done this to us for 3 decades, and he will continue indefinitely. And it was from that moment that I started actually writing about the human rights abuses in Togo and political oppression overall. And eventually in 2010, with a couple of friends of mine, when I was in the university, we launched the 4 Must Go movement. It was following the elections in 2010 when we realized that there is no way we could remove him just through traditional elections. They are going to find a way to rig themselves in and to rig their way in and use the military to terrorize people to stay in power. Then I felt like the only way for us to get out was to start a youth movement and to push for a civil resistance. And that's how the 4 Must Go movement started. It started as it came from a position of anger, and it could have died easily because so many movements started and died, but eventually it grew and kept growing. And even if today the movement is not as present as it used to be, the slogan 4 Must Go has rallied the entire opposition in Togo, which they are using both in the movement and in the parties. And it is something that I am extremely proud to see.
Between father and son, and I'm going to botch the name, Gnassingbé, between the two of them as president, how long have they been in power of the family?
59 years.
That's so long. So I want to get into, some of you, we were just talking about the movement that you started, and you talk a lot on corruption. So I'd like to kind of get into that, and if you can give us maybe some history or brief context for the kind of corruption that you're seeing and talking about in Togo, and then kind of went into some Bitcoin after that.
When you ask about corruption in Togo, it's so hard to know where to start from, because that is our way of life. That's the way of life of our government. Literally, corruption, I don't even know how to describe it. I think I need to just give some specific examples. A couple of years ago, a journalist exposed the fact that the national agency that is in charge of importing fuel is actually also run by a father and a son from the ruling regime, had embezzled a total of $1 billion. And Togo's GDP is $5 billion. So that's 1/5 of our GDP at a time. And the information initially was published in Panama Papers, and the journalists did further investigation and exposed the scandal. The government itself appointed people, an independent investigation agency, to look into it, and the investigation agency attested that indeed the money was embezzled. But till today, those people are still free. They have never been arrested. There's no charge against them. But the journalist was sentenced to 3 years in prison for defamation, for exposing that act of corruption. But then the thieves were not arrested or even bothered by the crime. There have been many other cases. In 2013, I published an article titled Charles Kondi Agba, the mosquito net thief. He was a minister of health for over 15 years. As a matter of fact, Togo is ruled by a ruling elite. We have the same people in power for 50, 20, 30 years. The same way when the president died, his son replaced them. When his ministers died, their children also replaced them. So it has been the same families from father and son in government. So it's a family business, literally. People leave and they replace themselves with their children, even when they are running a public agency. And this minister was there for 20 years, because being a minister in Togo is a career. I stumbled on an article posted by an organization called the Global Fund, which was calling out the fact that they donated 500,000 mosquito nets to Togo for a prenatal anti-malaria campaign that was supposed to be distributed to pregnant women. The minister sold the mosquito net to a fake company belonging to a friend of his for $1 each, and then used state fund to buy it back from his friend for $8 each. So technically, he committed fraud, and he made over $4 million doing that. So I wrote an article on my blog, and I exposed it. And that article came with all sort of backlash. And the worst backlash was the fact that that particular minister is from my parents' village. And eventually, a couple of weeks later, he was removed from that position, even though eventually they brought him back some years later. And when he was removed, I was accused for causing my village, my tribe, for losing the only minister they had at the time in government. And this guy has been minister for over 20 years, and that particular tribe, their community doesn't even have an infirmary that is functioning. They don't even have a single medical doctor for more than 600,000 inhabitants. But I am the one who's the problem because I made the community lose the minister. And it caused problems within my family to a point where my mom called my aunts and they went and bought goats and yam and other goods to go to the minister's house and beg to forgive me that I am erratic, I am a mad girl, I have mental health problems, I don't know what I'm doing, I should be forgiven for what happened. And I became an enemy in the entire family, both close family and extended family, for writing against, because anybody from your village is your uncle, writing against my uncle and exposing him and making him lose his title of minister. But to tell you that it's not just the fact that we have corruption in Togo. Corruption in Togo is unpunished, and it is the people who expose the corruption that are punished. To a point where people would rather keep quiet, whistleblower would rather keep the information to themselves, because the only retaliation is going to be against you who exposed the corruption, not the person who actually committed the act of corruption.
It's so insane.
If exposing corruption is a mental health issue, then I suppose everyone in this office has mental health issues.
Yeah. We're right there with you. Right there with you.
But Farida, to bring things to the present day, talk about how this, again, rampant, all-encompassing corruption, especially at the federal level, I'm sure it exists at local levels as well. Talk about how that intersects with your work on Bitcoin, because that's one of the things we wanted to talk with you about today, because, of course, you have been an outspoken advocate of the utility of Bitcoin, not only in Togo, but in the region, frankly, around the world, under authoritarian regimes. What are the advantages of that? What are the difficulties in using it as a potential tool to circumvent these corrupt networks? Tell us about how you have found Bitcoin to be useful in the fight against corruption for democracy.
At multiple levels. And I will start by saying Bitcoin as a tool to support us in the movement fighting against authoritarian regimes in the first place. In French, there is a saying that l'argent est le nerf de la guerre. Money is the nerve of the war. Without money, without financial resources, it's difficult to fight any oppressive system in place. And the regime in Togo has managed to maintain itself in power by doing something very simple, suffocating the movement and the opposition. People like my father have been prevented from working for over 20 years. My dad was working for a private international company, and he was sacked officially by the Minister of Labor in a private company, which made no sense. And when his boss refused to let him go, they sent soldiers to his workplace to wait for him every morning and arrest him when he comes to work. That's just one example among many others. People who are dissidents in Togo don't work. If they have a practice, they can practice. Even those that are medical doctors, they have to close their medical facilities. They will find every avenue to prevent you from earning money, because they are convinced that if you can make money, then you can fight them and you can be effective. So for many decades, those who have been funding the resistance have been in the diaspora. But what the regime started doing is to track the diaspora, people in the diaspora that donated money to the movement. So when people send money using traditional routes like the bank transfer or the Western Union, then those require KYC, the identification, information of the person sending, their address, their place of work. they use that information to track them and harass them and arrest them. As a matter of fact, we have someone who is in prison today who has been in prison for the past 6 years with no trial, to the point where he's been so tortured that he has lost all use of his legs simply because he donated the equivalent of $80 to the movement in Togo. So this has caused a massive level of fear, because people were afraid that by donating money, they will be tied to the movement and they can go to jail, especially when they come back home and they don't live in the country. So, and for those of us who left the country and are in exile, we had to continue supporting activities on the ground, supporting some of those who are still in prison. Sending money became difficult because we had to do it without exposing those who are back home. Because any link to them, anything linking them to us is going to be costly for their lives. And Bitcoin became that tool that provided us the needed level of anonymity. Today, I send money to Togo very frequently without my name being on any paper, without me having to send somebody to go to any bank or going to any public institution to withdraw the funds. Even if I want to support people that have nothing to do with the politics, I do the same thing to protect them. And we have been using that avenue to be able to send the money back home and to deploy resources to support the resistance on the ground without being seen. That is one of the user cases that is beneficial to us in the resistance. But beyond the resistance, I also see Bitcoin as being a very powerful tool that can really help us one day reduce the level of corruption in our governments overall in Africa, regardless of those nations being ruled by dictators or not. Because corruption is enabled by lack of transparency.
Right.
And it is the opacity of transactions that enables the corruption to exist. But what Bitcoin provides is that it is the first system of accountability that has a three-way layer. Because when you look at the regular ledger for accounting, you have accounts receivable, and then you have accounts payable. And any accountant knows those basics. But then with Bitcoin, you have a third layer, and it is the validation of the transaction on the blockchain, which is going to be there indefinitely forever and can never be altered. But most of the corruption actions that happen, especially at the government level, is all about somebody changing the data on how much money was paid and how much money was received. So you can actually even audit the firm and things will look good. It is usually when they are bad at stealing that they leave traces. But most of the theft happen in a completely untraceable matter. That's why Africa loses $1 trillion to corruption every year in illicit financial flight, and nobody knows where the money went. And when you make the accounts, you can't really understand how the money disappeared. But if we get to a point where taxes are paid on the blockchain, where civil servants are paid on the blockchain, where public services contracts are done and saved on the Bitcoin blockchain and are paid in Bitcoin, those transactions will be there for everybody to see for life.
Right.
It will be time stamped, date stamped, and it can never be altered. And there is no way they can go back and rectify that. So I am also promoting the adoption of Bitcoin as a tool to reduce corruption and to increase transparency in public expenditure overall across the continent, as a way for us to be able to increase accountability and transparency.
Yeah, I was going to say governments in Africa have been cautious or even hostile toward cryptocurrencies for all the reasons you've just named, that it can skirt their authoritarian attempts at controls, but also then at the same time put it on the record in a different way that they can't change and alter. Do you think through the work that you're doing, I presume that you're hopeful that this could be fully embraced, but what is the likelihood of it being fully embraced by West African countries?
I think we are getting there faster than ever, faster than expected. The beauty of Bitcoin is that it is a technology that is accessible to anyone. Anyone with internet. And even today, there are solutions that are being developed on the continent which is allowing people to acquire and spend Bitcoin without internet. And the thing is that a product like Bitcoin is perfect for a space like ours. The traditional financial system was not designed with countries like ours in mind. It costs a lot to be able to provide the infrastructure needed for that financial system to function. And I'll give you very simple examples. In my country, Togo, like it is the case in the vast majority of African nations, more than 50% of our citizens don't have birth certificates. People are completely undocumented. And in some countries, the number goes as high as 70%. And you go to the rural communities, more than 90% are not even registered at birth. And overall, we have a banking penetration on a continent of barely 30%, which means 70% of people don't have bank accounts, and they'll probably never have one. The infrastructure required to be able to register everyone, to even provide addresses. Our houses don't even have addresses. You ask for direction, they will tell you, when you go to this neighborhood, you turn to the right and the left, and you see a big mango tree. It's the second house after the mango tree. That's how we give directions here. That's our traditional GPS system. The model of banking does not work with the level of infrastructural deficit that we face. And for a long time, it was done in such a way that we live in a cash society where people can only use cash because they can't use the bank. But cash is very limiting, and cash doesn't circulate so easily outside of the big cities. But Bitcoin is reversing that step by step, because people don't need to have a bank account, they don't need to have a birth certificate, they don't need to have an address to be able to start using Bitcoin. Right. All they need is a phone. And today, the vast majority of people have phones in the communities. They have social media in the communities, even in the rural communities. My people in the village send me WhatsApp messages all the time. So Bitcoin has helped us leapfrog that infrastructural deficit to be able to access some financial services which the traditional financial system wouldn't have provided to us in the first place. Right. And you have no idea the level of freedom that comes with having access to basic financial services. The reality is that people who have no access to traditional banking, they can't have access to many other forms of services that come with banking, like having a pay stub, like obtaining a loan for your children to go to school, or even obtaining a loan to improve your business or improve your farm. They cannot access any of those. The truth is that they assume that people are so poor that they don't need any finances. But the poorer people are, the more financial services they actually need to get out of the poverty. And Bitcoin is actually providing that service to those who have been left out for many decades.
So, Farida, let's bring things up to the really present day. This December, you are organizing the flagship conference in Africa on Bitcoin. It's called the Africa Bitcoin Conference. Can you tell us a little bit about this conference? Because again, talking about things being adopted more rapidly than you even anticipated. Right now, we're having actual meetings of those that are not only in the crypto and Bitcoin community, but those who are on the front lines for the fight for freedom and against authoritarianism. Can you tell us a little bit about this conference and what you expect out of this conference this month? Yeah,
absolutely. So this conference is running in its third edition, and it's happening in Nairobi, Kenya. It's a conference that we wanted to to bring together Bitcoiners from all over the continent and beyond to be able to think about how we can fasten adoption on the continent, but then build solutions that will respond to the needs pertaining to the African market and the African communities. Understanding that when it comes to Africa, people are not into Bitcoin just for the sake of speculation. Most are not, but it is more of a utility for us, just like having access to electricity or having access to clean water. It is solving existential issues that we are facing daily with the difficulty of moving money across 54 countries with 46 different currencies that don't talk to each other. So that conference has seen us bring on the continent people who are involved in Bitcoin, developers, entrepreneurs, innovators, activists, advocates, policymakers, to reflect on how to improve services and to also provide an opportunity for networking, because we have seen some partnerships start from the conference and blossoming into very beautiful product and solutions, and we want to see more of that. We started this journey at a time where people were very skeptical at Bitcoin, simply because the price has dropped back in 2021, in the post-COVID period, and 2022. But we started at a time where people lost faith in Bitcoin. But people who lose faith in Bitcoin do so because they are into Bitcoin just for the fluctuation of the prices and for the financial gain. Mm-hmm. But for those of us who understand the technical hurdles that we face on the continent as a result of lack of access to resources and the colonial monetary system that we have to navigate, which make it very complicated for us, because sending money from Ghana to Togo which are neighboring countries, and both capital cities are 2 hours drive away, the money will first go to a bank in London, then go to France before coming back to Togo. A traditional bank transfer from Ghana to Togo will take 3 weeks for the money to hit the account, which is ridiculous.
Yes.
And it costs us billions of dollars every year. And with Bitcoin, we cut that number very much so. Remittance payments to Africa cost $17 billion a year. That's 3 times the GDP of Togo. And Bitcoin has actually reduced remittance payments, remittance fees to Africa by more than half in less than 5 years. So it is the fastest growing technology on the continent, and Africa has the fastest adoption rate than any other region in the world. As of today, we have over 100 million people using Bitcoin on the continent. And it is simply magic because we also have national currencies that are depreciating like crazy. When you look at Nigeria, the currency depreciated by over 200% over the past 1 year. And the Ghanaian cities are depreciated by over 80% over the past 1 year. More than half of the national currencies on our countries have depreciated by over half, when Bitcoin actually has tripled in price over the past 1 year. Of course, the price of Bitcoin is volatile. It depends on market demands and everything. But when people are not into speculation, but they are using it to be able to move money from point A to point B, without paying too much, disbursing too much fees, and without facing too many administrative hurdles, because in my country, Togo, for example, moving money above the amount of $3,000 require a ministerial approval. For any transfer that is international above $3,000. That's the way to control people and what they can do with their money or cannot do with their money. But with Bitcoin, people can bypass that, and they are doing that very easily. So at the conference, we want people to come to understand the opportunities that Bitcoin offers us in every sector, at the technological level, at the financial level, at the science level, and even at the business level. And most importantly for us activists, at the political level. So we also bring activists to the space to learn about these tools that they can use to improve their activism in the variety of spaces in which they operate.
That's amazing. I wish you all the luck in that conference. You're doing amazing work. I love following along and learning more about it. I'm not, new to Bitcoin once I joined HRF, and now I found a whole new world has opened up to me. And so through people like you, I get to learn more and how it actually affects human beings around the world.
I'm happy to hear that.
Well, Farida, before we let you go, how can folks follow more of your work, what you are interested in, and of course support you as well?
Thank you so much. They can follow me on X. My handle is Farida_N. I think that is the only place today on social media they can easily find me.
Wonderful. Well, Farida, thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to staying in contact and following more of your work in the future.
Same here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Farida.
Thank you for joining us for today's conversation with Farida Nabourema. We wanted to let you know that this is our last episode of 2024. Of course, we want to wish everyone a happy holidays, but we also wanted to let you know that we will be back in January with more important stories and, of course, inspiring guests. In the meantime, be sure to follow us on YouTube and Instagram at Dissidents and Dictators to keep up to date on all the latest episodes.
This episode is produced, engineered, and edited by Omar Al-Fatihi. Our intern is Sage Gibson.
Dissidents and Dictators is a production of the Human Rights Foundation, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that promotes and protects human rights globally with a focus on closed societies. We promote freedom where it's most at risk in countries ruled by authoritarian regimes.